Welcome to the riskadvisor.com podcast. I'm Sal Lafreri, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jim Henry. We hope you enjoy the show, and we're going to ask that you go to iTunes or your favorite podcast platform and give us a great rating. Your opinions mean a lot to us, and we'd like more people to log on and sign up. Today's topic, cloud-managed edge technology. Will it disrupt and potentially replace traditional infrastructure? Jim, what do you think? This is your bailiwick.
Well, I don't think it's question isn't will it, it's a matter of when, not if. It's just a process. The security industry, has been one of the more staid industries, that resisted the migration from analog to digital, taking a decade or so more than most people thought it was going to be. Because there's a lot of, conservative-minded, ex-law enforcement folks and whatnot, that make up the rank and file in security, and they're a little bit like folks from Missouri, and they're not too willing to adapt, new platforms, new technology, new culture. But you can't argue the economics that's coming in now with the migration of, technology and the horsepower now that is out at the edge. And as we will talk during the session here, the challenges and the costs that are coming from trying to, harden your traditional on-premise infrastructure from cyber threats.
I think the key points there is, one, you don't have to think about a whole lot. And coming from that world, we never wanted to think, And what was the thing? Edison's quote, 5% of the people think, 10% of the people think they think, the other 85% would rather die than think. Yeah, it's true. All right. So with us today, we have Matthew Moreno. With over 19 years of experience in the enterprise technology, services, and physical security industry, Matthew is responsible for the development and management of the Cisco Meraki MV solution for North America. Over the years, Matt's developed and managed relationships with many large national projects, including mega city transformations with joint partnerships in commercial and government agencies. Also with us in the studio, Matthew Shanner, currently the Regional Sales Director for Cisco Meraki's commercial business for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. He spent the majority of his career focused on physical security and facility management, helping customers reduce complexities and increase awareness. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us.
So let's talk about, part number one here about solving the increased cost and complexity, something that I just said, from the end user side of it, we don't want to have to think and we're worrying about costs. So tell us a little about how do we solve that increase in costs and complexities of the internet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the challenges that we've seen in the industry is as we've sort of gotten more specialized, specialty cameras, specialty platforms, specialty features, these systems tend to get more and more complicated with all of the different integrations and different vendors, so on and so forth. You look at a typical physical security deployment, and there's no more than, no less, I should say, than 3 vendors, right? You've got an NVR vendor, you've got a camera vendor, you've got an integrator, you've got applications developer, you've got a analytics platform, so on and so forth. And the folks that make these decisions tend to get very wowed by all of the cool technology that they see, and they see the price tag and they go, yeah, but in the name of security, we're willing to spend the money to get this technology. And then you ask them a year and a half later, how are you using it? And you ask the operators that are actually using the technology, and they all, for the most part, from all the customers we've interviewed, the vast majority of them say the same thing, which is like, we don't know how to use it. The training was too tough. The person who knew how to do it left. We've got 3 new people on staff who never learned it. All we want to be able to do is get the answer to the question, what happened when? We just want to see the video. We just want to download the clip. We just want to send it to law enforcement. These sort of basic elements that you would think every system can handle really well.
I agree with what you just said, with the fact that how many of these systems you have, people have capabilities that they just don't recognize. And how many times you go in on a consulting and you talk to someone doing an assessment and you realize that they have it and that they're asking you, hey, can we get this? And yeah, but you already got it. So we see this often. So it's a valid point.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, there's a big separation between the person using the system and the person who's making the decision to buy the system, right? Like the cool features sell really well in a presentation, but when you're actually going to use them, it becomes a challenge, right? What most people wind up doing is they start to sort of naturally attract themselves to the simplest answer to the problem, right? What's the easiest way to just get the thing that I want? And if we can provide that, if we can make it easier and in the process make it less expensive, there's no reason why a customer or an installation wouldn't start moving in that direction.
So in the quest for simplicity, the users, in trying to get to the bottom line, have been often taking shortcuts, whether it's operationally, sometimes even in the hardware. It's just too difficult to do things the right way. And as cyber threats became more and more serious, the consequences of those shortcuts are pretty consequential. I would imagine that is that's adding to the willingness of the industry, to look at a different approach.
Yeah, it's a really good point. We laugh. Cisco obviously sells a lot of things other than video surveillance, and we spoke to a customer not too long ago who was incredibly proud that their Cisco switch had not been restarted in 10 years. They showed us a screenshot of the running config that said it hadn't been restarted for 10 years, and they were so proud of it. And everyone else in the room, especially those that are security-minded, said, "You haven't patched that switch in 10 years?" and they said, like, well, I haven't needed to patch it. It's been running fine. And we're like, you can Google and vulnerabilities on our code from 10 years ago. Like, they teach that in college classes. Like, you got to upgrade that thing every time that there's new firmware out. When you start asking folks, like, well, why don't you upgrade your systems more often? You get one of two answers, right? One answer is, it's just too difficult to do. I've got too many components that have to upgrade with different upgrade cycles. I can't keep track of when they have to be upgraded. Or you get I'm afraid to. I'm afraid that if I upgrade the system to the next platform, it's going to break something that I built 6-7 years ago, that integration is crucial to my operation. And if I upgrade any component of it, I'm going to break it. So you wind up having these vulnerabilities that exist as part of the thing that's trying to protect you. A good example is we hear video surveillance customers quite a bit who have workstations, right? You've got a dedicated PC that's running this piece of software. This piece of software was spec'd for a specific version of Windows on a specific type of browser, a specific type of plugin for that browser. And then the plugin goes away, or the browser has a vulnerability, so it needs to be upgraded, or the operating system goes end of life, right? Like, how many systems still operate on Windows XP? And the customer says, oh, we have a really secure infrastructure, except for the video surveillance workstation. That thing we haven't touched, because if we do, we could break the whole system. And that is one of the things that we're trying to fix, right? We're trying to fix this issue where people are afraid to upgrade, or it's too complicated to do it, or they're afraid they're going to break a bunch of things if they do. That creates more security vulnerabilities than anything else.
It gives them the downtime that they're afraid of. The camera's going to take 8 hours to fix this, and what happens if something happens during those 8 hours?
Yep, 8 hours. I mean, just recently we were talking to basically a global university that took 8 months to prepare for their upgrade for their video surveillance system, and then took another 3 months to actually execute on upgrading that. That's an incredible amount of time wasted, and certainly preparation that accounts for dollars that they didn't account for when they purchased that system, right? And this is an upgrade for just a version, let alone any kind of infrastructure or IT advantage that you're trying to attain.
So I guess Cisco finds itself now having been, really they had led the way in the deployment of most of the large scale IT infrastructure that, we have out there today. And, now they're effectively leading the way in a new topology that really is going to succeed that older architecture. And it's, because you can push a lot of these, a lot of these features and decisions and whatnot, out to the edge. So do you see that as being disrupting your own legacy?
Correct. We're not necessarily disrupting the legacy of Cisco by doing this. We're just taking advantage of basically of all of the systems that they built in the past and designing video surveillance around a different infrastructure, similar to cloud, right? Or the Meraki way, of course, with the entire Meraki product portfolio. But disrupting isn't necessarily just architecture. Of course, that is a big part of our solution, if you will, at Meraki, right? Everything on the edge, right? The compute, the storage, the video, everything that you could possibly think of, whether it was a more pervasive way of using analytics for that matter. But it's also a disruptive in the way that it goes to market, right? With how it's purchased, who's buying it, right? Whether it is being resold through channel, all of those kind of factors play into the idea of what disruptive is. And absolutely, it's definitely a disruptive kind of, to dumb it down a little bit, architecture. that should change the way all of those things are perceived, right? You had mentioned, the old physical security buyer being either retired law enforcement, et cetera. And we at Meraki have identified that as not the case. They are not the buyers per se anymore. They're certainly the users, right? But the buyers are definitely more of certainly traditional IT buyers, right? CIO level type stuff, especially on large scale, enterprise type scale. But also there's a component of the software that's embedded in some of this technology that is non-physical security related, right? Talking just in vertical stretch of retail. There's analytics for merchandising and store operations, all of those things that analytics have sold in the past, but now we're putting it all into theoretically one SKU, one architecture, one type of deployment that encompasses a lot more than just a retired FBI agent buying for a bank. There is a lot more complexity into the idea of purchasing that causes that disruption, but also how you get to that person and who's selling it to them.
Yeah, and Matt, to that point, I think that it's so interesting from an edge technology perspective how powerful these edge devices really have gotten, right? If you think about just the compute power that we have in our own cell phones, right? How far that's come even just in the past handful of years. Take that same amount of compute power, put it in an enterprise edge device like a video surveillance camera that can do things like video analytics and people detection and vehicle detection and so on and so forth in an edge device. And being able to add capacity to that system just by adding a camera, not having to add a whole bunch of back-end infrastructure to be able to get any of these features. I think most of the video surveillance buyers that we're talking to today, the retired law enforcement officer is still in the room, right, for sure. They're definitely part of the decision-making process. But often we find that the conversation isn't just anymore between the security team and the C-level, right? There might be folks from marketing. There might be folks from, if it's EDU, from student retention that are saying, hey, how does the investment in the system go beyond just looking at video, right? We want to do more with this. How do we know if there's enough vehicles in a parking lot or how many vehicles are circling a parking lot? Do we need to add spaces? How many people are using this building at certain times of day? How do we get more data out of this system? And we have a fair number of customers that use our cameras just for the analytics. They don't even look at the video. They don't even look at the photos. They just want to know how many people were in this room at this time, how many vehicles passed through this area of our campus or this drive-through during these hours, right? They don't really need to see the video. They just want the analytics. And that is a huge part of this edge processing story.
So I guess at the heart of the attractiveness here is that if you can provide that simplicity of operation, you can provide it with security, cyber security, you can make it more economical and feature rich. That's very compelling to the buyer.
Absolutely.
Yep. I'm just sitting here thinking about it, and I didn't think about it when we were talking about disruptive technology, but when you started explaining about the different uses and the applications that you can have and how it cross-pollinates across the different verticals that a company would have, within retail and those operations, one of the things that security is always faced with, the biggest problem is that it's always been a cost center and nobody ever wants to spend the money on the equipment. Right? So you always try and figure it out. So at one point we would look at it and say we would install new equipment, or it would give us better capability against threats and risk, and it would give us a reduction in insurance. Well, today we understand that, you have to be at that level just to be able to get a policy, right? So, now we're back to square one, that it's a cost center for us. So the concept that you have a technology like this that can be deployed, the security directors, if they're smart, are going back to the CEOs in those meetings and saying, wait a second, time out. I need this, but you can also use it and try and associate revenue generation to it and show it where it can cost.
That's absolutely a valid point, right? When we look at the overall cost of, let's say, an intelligent endpoint, what we call them, right, or sensors for that matter, or cameras, just as easy to say it that way too. You have to look at, let's call it $1,000 camera, right? We look at that as a pie chart, if you will. And it used to be that $1,000 was spent directly on the physical security buyer for risk mitigation and safety, and security for the campus or for whatever reason. But now we're saying, hey, you know what? Why don't you just cut out a portion of that $1,000 camera as part of physical security, whatever the value is in your perception of it, and then take the remaining $900 and theoretically cut it up into other components that you can extract from. So it's not just a $1,000 camera anymore for a physical security buyer. It's only $100